In this video, I'm going to be showing you how we can go from lots of individual shots with a lot of blur and a very shallow depth of field, typically macro shots, for example, to one kind of more sharp, far more in focus image. And we're going to be using Luminar Neo's focus stacking tool. Now, quick disclosure and disclaimer before I start this. I was provided with a copy of this to do these videos, and I am an affiliate of the program, but that doesn't cloud my view. I just wanted to be upfront with you. I'll be honest in my thoughts of this software, and Luminar, or Skylum, I should say, have no editorial control over this video. So if I think it's not great, I'll tell you. All right, so what we're going to do in this video is we're going to take individual photos where you'll see there's a really shallow depth of field. And by depth of field, I mean the part that's actually in focus. It's really, really small. So these mushrooms are tiny for reference, and I've shot them on a macro lens with a 2x Raynox magnifying piece on it. So what that means is the depth of field is remarkably shallow. And you'll see really no one image has much of the entire image in focus. Now, people might ask, why not just increase the depth of field? And that's a fair point. But the reality is there are a lot of reasons that you can't. Even if I shot this at f22 or greater, if the lens allows it, I'm still not going to get the whole image in focus, because the more you magnify things, the shallower the depth of field becomes. Even on a high aperture, there are just physics restrictions. And you especially see this in microscopes, by the way. So even with a microscope, what you'll find is that the light refraction and a whole lot of other things mean that you just can't get a better depth of field through one image. So to get around that, what we do is called focus stacking. And what I've done in all of these images that you've probably hopefully noticed is I've done this with a manual lens. I've kept the settings pretty much the same, and I've just moved the focus point, taken a photo. And I've repeated that about 17 times. So I've got about 17 or so photos where the focus point just moves a little bit each one to try and get as much coverage as possible. Now, the more photos you get, the better the outcome will be. And if I miss gaps in here, so let's say I miss a certain part of this, then that's going to be blurry, no matter how many photos I've got before and after that. So you really need to make sure that you cover as much of the image as possible. Now, you can do this on what's called a rail, which can be motorized. They are expensive though, and it basically just moves the camera back and forth, takes a photo, moves, takes a photo, moves. And they're great if you're into dedicated macro photography or focus stacking, as we call it. Some other cameras, I believe, have a focus stacking mode built into them. Mine doesn't, unfortunately. So I've got my 17 images. Now I took these on a tripod that was on the wood. And a really important thing to note, you have to make sure your subject doesn't move. So if you're trying to take a photo of a flower in the wind or a jumping spider that's moving around, it will not work well. Now, that's because it needs to basically align the images to each other. And if the subject has moved, it can't align it properly. So now that we've got all of that background out of the way, what I'm going to do is I'm in the catalog section of Luminar Neo. I'm going to select all of these images and I'm going to drag them into focus stacking. Now, the three dots on the right-hand side give us some options. So we can do auto alignment, which most of the time you'll probably need to do, and that just aligns the images to each other. There's also reference image. So this has just randomly picked one in the middle. I think it's just picked the very middle one. That's fine. But if there was a certain image that you wanted everything to be aligned to and from, then you'd pick that there. Now, you could also turn on chromatic aberration, which is where you might have purple and green fringing around the end, and then you can click out of this. Now, if you click remove all images, obviously it'll take all the images out. We don't want to do that. You can individually delete images as well, but I'm just going to click on stack. Now, my computer is not the newest of computers, but it's not necessarily a slouch either. It's a MacBook Pro, 24 gig of RAM. I think it's an M2, and this takes quite a while. So I haven't timed it, but I'd estimate between probably 5, maybe 10 minutes. It's hard to tell with time relativity. It feels like an hour. It's definitely not, though. Now, the more photos you have, the longer it will take, obviously. These are all raw photos, so it does mean that there's a lot more data for it to process. You could potentially look at other formats, maybe JPEGs that are smaller, and you might get it done a bit faster. But in this case, I really wanted to try and get the most out of the image, to try and get a really high quality image. A couple of other points that you might have noticed, these are quite dark. Now, I've just applied some enhance to these to show it a bit easier, but it's taken the raw unprocessed images. What that means is that my end macro focus stacking result is going to be quite dark, and then I'm just going to have to do some post-processing, which is fine. No real problem with that at all. So I'm going to skip forward on this, and I'm just going to put roughly an approximate time on how long it took. So you can see, as I said, the more photos, the better the result, but also the longer it will take. So it may be a case that you start this and leave it running overnight or something similar. For reference, when I do microscopy images or some quite significant focus stacked images, you might have hundreds of images within that, so it can take a very long time. Now, being really transparent, this is a good tool within Luminar Neo to get started with focus stacking, but if you're doing focus stacking as more than an amateur, if you're doing it professionally or you want to really, really get more in depth, there are other packages that are dedicated to this. I use Helicon Focus, which is quite a good tool, and there's also a few others that exist. I'll try and put them in the comments below. But as a starting point, if you've got the software as in Luminar Neo already, and you want to sort of dip your toes into the water of macro and focus stacking, then this is a really handy tool because it's already here. I'll skip forward now. So that's now finished, and I'll put this timestamp on the image or on the video to show how long it took. But you'll notice first off, it's really dark. As I said, I had applied some enhance to this in the original images, but the actual focus stacking takes the raw unedited images. So I could just apply some develop and bring that up, or I could use some enhance or accent AI to also improve it and make it a bit brighter. But what you'll notice here is that when you compare the two, there's far more in focus in this image than there was in the first. Now, it's still not perfect. You'll see there are still some blurry parts within here, especially under some of the mushrooms. That basically means I've missed a focus point. So I should have taken smaller gaps between the focus, and probably instead of 17, maybe I do more. Now, if your aperture was a little bit higher and your depth of field was a bit wider, it wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But as I said, that is much harder to do on a macro image, especially when you're at 2 times magnification, which this one is. So you can see though that to go from something like this, where we have a really, really shallow depth of field and only a tiny section of the image is in focus, to something like this, where we have far more of it in focus is pretty cool. And I think it's a pretty interesting use of technology. And the fact that this is within Luminar Neo, now, of course, check your licenses to make sure it is included in that specific license. But the fact that this is a tool within Luminar Neo is, I think, really handy for people that want to get used to focus stacking and try different images, see what works, see what doesn't. And then when they're happy with it and they decide they want to take more advanced processes, you can look at Helicon Focus or I think it's Zareen Stacker or some of the other dedicated focus stacking tools. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you enjoyed what you got out of this video. Any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments.